Good afternoon. My name is Julian Montero, and I'm here with my colleagues Fabiola Jimenez and Jennifer Cabrera, and we are part of the legal committee of the National Hispanic Cannabis Council. It's a pleasure to be with you today as part of our inaugural NHCC Legal Committee Forum Roundtable. We hope to have an interactive conversation where we will discuss some of the trends we've seen in the industry in 2021 and discuss some of the topics that are impacting the Hispanic cannabis community. And joining us as well will be Jericho Perez. So let's start with an introduction to the National Hispanic Cannabis Council. We are a purpose-driven 501c4 nonprofit organization created by progressive thought leaders in the cannabis industry and with a primary mission to address the current underrepresentation of Hispanics participating in this industry. The mission of the NHCC is to educate the Hispanic community with respect to the health, wellness, and economic opportunities with the industry and to empower their support and participation in the industry. So again, we are part of the legal committee of the council, and we hope to have an interactive conversation with subject matter experts on topics that are relevant to the industry and that perhaps can be trends as the industry continues to develop. So with that, if each of you could take a moment and introduce yourselves. We can start with Jericho.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. I'm Jericho Perez. I am a partner at Vicente Cederberg. I've been with the firm for about 7 years now. When I actually started clerking here at the end of my law school career, I was initially interested in doing criminal defense law. And then when I started clerking with the firm, I really found a passion for practicing cannabis law. And that really aligned with, my reasoning for wanting to do criminal defense. It's a very grassroots movement. Being a Hispanic myself and being able to support this community in something where we have historically been shut out and have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. It was a great opportunity for me to be involved in my community and support our community in what I love to do, which is practicing cannabis law. My practice here at VS is primarily focused on national licensing, specifically competitive licensing and limited licensing opportunities. And what we're seeing more and more of now in those jurisdictions that are offering these types of licensing application processes is incentive and benefits for social equity and minority owned or focused businesses to actually get licensed and prioritized in this industry, which is absolutely fantastic. So have assisted clients with submitting and starting up businesses in California, Ohio, Missouri, Hawaii, New York, New Jersey. So love what I do here, love the opportunity to be on the board with NHCC, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Jericho. Fabiola, you're on my screen next. If perhaps you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Fabiola Jimenez. I am a senior attorney with Cultiva Law. We're a West Coast law firm. We're primarily focused on cannabis clients. Particularly, my practice really focuses on mergers and acquisitions, regulatory compliance, and intellectual property portfolio management. So I get to dabble in a lot of different types of areas with my clients, but my real focus is a lot of business development and product development. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to having this discussion.
That's terrific. Jennifer?
Hello, my name is Jennifer Cabrera. I am with the New York and New Jersey offices of Vicente Cederberg. I've been with the firm for 2.5 years. I joined in May of 2019, which is when we launched our New York office. And now, of course, both states are actively opening up their adult use markets. So a lot of opportunities for Hispanics in these areas. For background, I'm Cuban American. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, first generation. And my perspective has always been that of the small business owners and the Latino community and the family-owned businesses. And I just care so much about helping these individuals make it into this industry and create generational wealth.
Terrific, thank you. And I'm Juan Montero. I'm a partner with Saul Ewing. I am a business corporate attorney, predominantly involved with private equity transactions and global investors. We have more of an institutional cannabis practice focused on some of the financing and larger acquisitions in the industry. So with that, if we could go around and perhaps what are some of the major misconceptions that you all have seen this year with respect to the Hispanic participation in this industry? Maybe each of you can give us a little bit that you've seen as a major misconception around the cannabis industry and Hispanic participation in the industry. Fabiola, care to go first?
Sure. Well, to me, I've actually been speaking to a number of different other Latina women in the industry lately. So I've had a lot of practice actually talking about this. But one of the biggest issues that I'm seeing in the Latino community trying to accept the cannabis community is really kind of that lack of education, and really trying to understand that as professionals in this industry, we are that first and foremost. We are professionals. Personally, for me, my parents thought that as soon as I took this job with this primarily cannabis law firm, that I was going to be consuming throughout the day, and that's just kind of what I needed to be able to function in this law firm. And so it took a little bit of time to be able to provide them with the right educational tools and materials to really let them know that no, my job is being a lawyer. I just happen to be in this industry, and I really enjoy this type of work, and I really enjoy the people that I work with. And so that was probably the biggest misconception that I had to overcome personally. And I've heard this at least 3 times this week in my various discussions with other Latina women, is that this is, it's a dangerous industry, and it's hard to be able to separate that into what it actually really is, where this is, at least to me, it's another agricultural commodity. It's just like another product that you become comfortable with and working with on a daily basis.
How about you, Jared?
I definitely, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I've definitely had that experience, Fabiola. And I think that there is a real social conservatism among a lot of Hispanics, where there is this hesitancy to accept that this is a legitimate thing to do. And I think it's born of years of being a marginalized group and really being scared of getting on the wrong side of the law, wanting to show that you're model citizens and that you are not, you're following all the rules. And so I think it's challenging, I think, especially for the older generations, to accept that this is okay. That said, my experience, I knew plenty of people in my community who were using this product. So it's not like it's completely out of left field. Another thing I've really noticed a problem with is, this is just partly because I'm in such new markets on the East Coast, is people assuming, okay, this is legal now, where can I go buy it? I can now sell this, everything's fine. So explaining no, this is actually something that you can't go to a store and buy yet. There are no licenses for you yet. That's definitely a learning curve.
Sorry, and kind of to add into that, one other thing that I was having a conversation with family was really understanding that, you have the cannabis as a business, and then it's the criminal side of it, and actually having that, and how does that play into it? Because I've had the same conversation where we're oh, in Washington State, and on the West Coast, you can go into a dispensary and pick a product up. But, I've had people ask me, so I can just grow my own stuff, right? And I can just sell it on the street. And I was nope, that's still a crime. We need to understand that, yeah, it is legal, but you have to differentiate the business side and then the criminal history, and kind of dealing with that issue too. So yeah, that was a great point to bring up.
Yeah, I would add too, on the business side of it, as we see some of these newer markets open up, or even existing markets open up opportunities for the Hispanic community to actually enter into the industry. thinking that in order to be part of one of these businesses or to enter the industry, you need hundreds of thousands of dollars, or that you need some sort of specific background in business or education in order to get into the industry, which is not necessarily true because of some of these newer opportunities with social equity programs that are starting to operationalize. And while there is lots of room for improvement there, there is opportunity for the Hispanic community as social equity business owners to come into the industry. I'll give, Colorado as an example. We've had some clients come to us and just say, well, I can't afford to pay an attorney tens of thousands of dollars to help me get started in this business. Rent is off the wall in Denver. How am I ever going to get a facility? But in programs that are workable, and as we improve these programs, our firm does pro bono work for these types of applicants. And
I think Jennifer may be having Wi-Fi problem. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you, Julian. Jericho, I can't hear you.
Oh.
Okay.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, and from my perspective, with respect to the Hispanic community participating in this here in Miami, it's interesting as I've been listening attentively. I represent a lot of investors from South America that are quite eager to enter into this market and don't appear to have any of the burdens, the stigma that the American Hispanic community may have. And this is actually a really interesting societal concept that I've been observing. Particularly, we're seeing all sorts of entrepreneurs from Colombia that are really ahead of the curve, trying to enter. And so wait a minute, can I bring plant product? And it's like, wait a minute, there's all sorts of very interesting regulations associated with what you can bring and what you can't bring. But at least what we're seeing with the inbound entrepreneur from South America, they're embracing this and they're chomping at the bits to enter. So I hope that trend will continue through the different communities that are currently in the U.S. That, I think, sort of ties into why do you feel that the Hispanic community may be resistant towards this? And I'll age myself. I'm from the Cheech and Chong days. You guys are probably too young for that, but those are the movies that I grew up watching. And I think there's very much that, I don't want to be associated with that, right? Those are people making fun of us. Those are people making fun of people that look like us, that think that we're potheads, we're just lazy, we're going to goof around all day long. And that's a burden. I think that's a big burden, and probably is more of a burden for people in my generation. And I would hope that younger entrepreneurs don't have that. But what do you all think about what are some of the hesitancies in our communities towards this industry? Jericho?
Can you guys hear me? Am I working now?
Yep.
Okay, great. I would just add that, being younger, and I'm very familiar with Cheech and Chong as well. For me, I think it can go back to reefer madness, right? I mean, as Black and brown people, we were historically seen as criminals, and part of that was because we used marijuana, and anyone that used marijuana was a criminal, and that was majority Black and brown people, when we actually know that it was just disproportionately, the arrest rates were completely disproportionate, right? So I think that generationally, it became viewed as, if you're using marijuana or associated with marijuana, you are a criminal. And I know, my grandmother and my grandfather are still not necessarily on board with marijuana because of that. And they don't have the access and exposure to the same sorts of updates in the legal field and regulation or medicine that we have access to. So there's no, the message isn't getting to them. And I think that generationally, that's where hopefully we can begin to improve as more adult use markets and medical markets do come on board.
I totally second that, and I totally agree with everything you said. I also think that there is a big component of misinformation that's floating around as well when you start thinking about how the Latino community consumes information. Like, again, personally, my family is like obsessed with Facebook, and I can recall the number of different smoothies my dad was making off of this Facebook video he saw, and he had like 25 ingredients, and it was all about health and all this, really pushing this type of product. But at the same time, they also become very vulnerable to the misinformation and some of this propaganda that's out there that is continuing against the industry for whatever reason. And so, yeah, I think it's difficult to disseminate the right information, especially from the legal perspective. We can get, in the regulatory compliance area in particular, you start really learning about the scientific methods of testing and, these new ways of production or storage and all these different components that make up the plant. And so now it becomes a much more in-depth, complicated commodity, as opposed to just, oh, it's just weed and it's here. It's when you really get into the science and you really have these conversations with these people that really do love this industry and really understand it. I mean, you can have hour-long conversations on the complexity of the cannabis plant and what it can do and what it can't do. And sometimes that's hard to disseminate via, the normal or the accepted norms of disseminating information to the Latino community. And when you start looking at like where they're consuming it, how it's being consumed, it's very, it's a battle for sure to be able to educate the Latino community and how complicated and amazing this industry is.
Jennifer?
I think that these are all completely right on. And I live in an area with a lot of illegal immigrants. And I think the fear of running afoul of arbitrarily enforced law is definitely something that makes this more dangerous for a lot of folks. I mean, even within the community that's been here for like a generation or more, like there is just that you carry it with you, like that fear. But I will say that for younger people, for the most part, and I almost feel like I'm on the older end of this, because when I graduated law school in 2006, like cannabis law wasn't a job. So Brian Vicente and Christian Cederberg had the vision to think that, okay, this is going to be an industry, we can make this happen. I did not. I'm not that kind of person. And so I just couldn't even imagine this existing. But for people younger than myself, who are, especially people who are going through law school now, they see cannabis law as sexy law. It's so exciting. That is what you want to be in. So I think it's changing incredibly rapidly.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, so we are the legal committee. Let's get into some of the legal topics. Jennifer, why don't you discuss a little bit about some of the new states and in particular your experience in New Jersey and New York?
Of course. So a number of states across the country, and Jericho and Fabiola will be able to speak to this as well, have social equity programs. There is a big emphasis on making sure that the licenses are awarded in a way that it's not just going to white people. So there is a big emphasis on diversity in different ways. New York and New Jersey, as two more recent states to legalize, and also states with huge minority populations, have very heavy social equity components to their programs. So looking at New Jersey, they have set up a system where something like 30% of licenses need to go to diversely owned businesses. And that includes businesses that are minority owned, women owned, or veteran owned. But minority owned is the biggest group there that's represented. And the way that the commission, the regulator in New Jersey, has set it up, they are prioritizing applications that come from diversely held businesses. So people, if you can set up your business basically in such a way that it's majority owned by a diverse person, you're going to the front of the line. And this is a structure that we're seeing in several states. Like New York doesn't have its licensing structure in place yet, but we imagine it'll be something similar to this, where again, you're getting priority review if you are a diversely held business. What that means is that if you are a Latino American anywhere in the country and you own 51% of a business, you can go to New Jersey. As long as you satisfy all the regulatory requirements, you're at the front of the line. And that's something that honestly does reflect like the demographic makeup of New Jersey, which is this massive Hispanic population, has for pretty much my whole life, but it keeps growing. So I think that is definitely something that is, I think it's an imperfect tool to address the problem of the war on drugs and of all of the inequality that exists. However, it is a step in the right direction, and it does offer this opportunity for small businesses if you are from these backgrounds. So there's just definitely there's a lot there. A big problem is just lack of access to information, and lawyers like us are all expensive because we charge a billable hourly rate. And so the more you use us, the more expensive it gets. So we're really making an effort through the National Hispanic Cannabis Council, the legal committee in particular, to just provide these resources to the public in general of what opportunities there are, and just help people get on the right track so that they can take advantage of them.
And Fabiola, you've seen that as well in some of the states that you cover as well. What are some of the trends in the recent states?
Sure. So, I mean, I think it's great that the East Side is really prioritizing this. Like the West Coast is now kind of coming online with social equity, and now it's becoming like a hot word in the industry. And how do you do it? So like, so I think it's great that the East Coast is really prioritizing that. Washington in particular has gone through its ups and downs. So they introduced the social equity program more than a year ago, and everyone was really excited about it. And there was a lot of hard lessons that the state learned right off the bat. So one of the things that was really important to them was trying to get the input from the community. So they introduced this social equity program. And I don't know if they just didn't have this idea to ask the community, or like who really was behind the development of the social equity program. But they introduced it, and then they went ahead and reached out to the community, and it just went bananas. The conversations were just, really crazy. I was listening on the conference calls. You had people from all different parts of the industry really giving their 2 cents on it. And there was a lot of lessons there. There was a lack of thought in how the equity program was going to be developed. There was moments of confusion. There was moments of chaos, but as Jennifer said, it's a step in the right direction. Again, I appreciate the initiative to even put this program out, and I further support the fact that they're going and asking for the community's input on this. However, it's a much more complicated program to develop than I think a lot of folks do, because there's so many different layers to addressing the inequalities and some of the issues that the war on drug has caused the Latino and Black communities. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think there's a lot of growth to be had. I think as programs develop, they're going to be evolving and changing, and they hopefully adapting to the community's needs. And that's all I can hope for at this point. But we're at a starting point, which is great.
Yeah. Jericho, can I ask you, what are some of the challenges you see with your practice with respect to social equity programs and the development of social equity programs? Because I think it would be fair to state that it really hasn't been all rosy, right? There's litigation and there's been some significant missteps. Could you care to comment on some of those?
Sure. So I think with these social equity programs, they're usually categorized by how applicants or licensees may qualify for social equity, right? So a lot of times we see that they are race-based, and perhaps it's majority ownership by a minority individual, right? Over 51% ownership by a Hispanic person or an African American person. And then we also see where it's not race-based at all. And social equity qualification is entirely based on income or residency in a disproportionately impacted area, things like that, right? And I think we see more challenges when we're looking at states that are basing qualification and incentives for social equity on race. We did see in Ohio, for example, that back in 2017, when they tried to implement a race-based social equity program, that was actually ruled unconstitutional, and the entire race part of the statute was invalid and not considered when it actually came to licensing. And they just had a recent round of limited licensing where applicants were not prioritized for social equity. So I think that's a great example of a race-based issue we had. And I think Illinois is another example where, Illinois, I think, made an effort to do it right. They really did try and prioritize social equity owned, minority owned businesses. There were actually a few ways you could qualify as social equity, and residency was one of those. Having a marijuana related criminal charge was one of those, and which we know those charges, right, were disproportionately handed out to Black and Brown people, which directly involves the Hispanic community. And unfortunately, in that application process, lawsuits after the fact were filed because certain social equity businesses felt that they were unfairly rejected for points on the minority ownership impact piece or disproportionately impacted piece. And it's had the complete opposite intended effect on the program. It stalled the entire program. So those social equity and minority owned businesses have been sitting in limbo for years now, and they can't afford to pay rent, right? Investors are dropping off of those businesses while we're waiting for a legal decision at the court level. So unfortunately, the only businesses that are operating are the existing, primarily white-owned businesses that were licensed for medical use, and those businesses that can afford to keep investors on and can afford to keep properties, which are majority white-owned. So I hope we do see resolution there. I think in these more limited license states like Alabama, which we'll see coming online in 2022, Georgia, which recently had a licensing process for a very limited number of licenses, prioritized social equity. I'm hopeful that they will be successful in implementing that program. And there's states that exist like Colorado and California who are trying, while they already have licensing processes and regulatory schemes and are operating, trying to prioritize and provide incentives for social equity owned businesses where it's not necessarily priority in licensing, which it actually is here in Denver. That's a new program, but also providing grant opportunities to these businesses, educational opportunities, incubator opportunities is something that Colorado is implementing. So not directly related to licensing benefits or limited licensing, but I think those are great opportunities to get the community involved in jurisdictions where the industry already does exist.
Right. So we, through the NHCC, did a very interesting inquiry with respect to participants, Hispanic participants in the industry a while back, right? And one of the items that I saw was very telling was the challenge associated with access to capital. And it seems to me that you can try to legislate equity, but if we're not addressing access to capital, can we really be successful? Because you can have a license. How are you going to develop the business without this access to capital? I don't know if this is something that you're seeing collectively as a potential challenge, and if there are solutions. And one of the concerns from a corporate and structural perspective is the fear that you can have a straw person to be a front for the application. And you can, through a variety of clever ways and legal ways, really strip out the economic benefit associated with this business, right? any opinions on the matter or thoughts that are popping up associated with this?
I have a couple to share. So I would say that some states are getting much more savvy about that practice of using straw men to just be a figurehead, really, who don't actually have any equity interest. Like, for instance, New Jersey's regulations, which are some of the most far-reaching in the country at this point, really make sure that the owner of that 51% of the business has all of the rights of an owner. They need to share in the profits and losses of the business. They need to, they can't be bought out or they'll lose their status. Now, we don't know how that'll work in practice, but there are a number of provisions that make it, that provide protection for the person who owns it. You see this also in some other states, like Massachusetts really just wants to make sure that you don't have like changes in ownership or something that looks like ownership, but is not actually that. So I think more states going in that direction is definitely one way to address it. And also then if you can get one of these positions, like it is such a great opportunity if you are able to do it. It's not available to everyone. It's only available to the lucky few who get plucked out of the group to work with the big MSO. But I mean, when you get to, that's a great opportunity to do it and to learn the business from a big operator. And I think that is one way to look at this, that if you can work with a more experienced group, learn how they do things, make sure that you have a lawyer representing you and protecting your interests. That is always so crucial. Then you can come out of this with some money and, more importantly, knowledge of how to run a successful business in a growing industry.
Yeah, to piggyback off something Jennifer just said, I think there's a lot of responsibility that needs to be placed on some of the bigger MSOs and existing operators and majority white-owned companies to make an effort to remedy the harms of the drug war and to involve these communities appropriately in this industry. And I think that in addition to making sure that we don't see this straw man scenario with those companies, it's also providing funding, and it's also providing incubation opportunities and developing these programs internally on a corporate level, a corporate responsibility level across their operations in the US. Because most of these companies they're licensed in every state, right? And we're talking about limited license jurisdictions, which is primarily where I do most of my work. Hundreds of thousands of dollars go into winning one of these licenses. And the fact is that a lot of the Black and brown owned companies don't have the resources to bring on, world renowned researchers and medical professionals to be part of their applications. And the bigger MSOs do. So I think there's a responsibility there. And we have to hold those companies accountable, and the regulators have to hold those companies accountable to involve the right communities in these businesses and to do it responsibly and fairly.
Sure. Fabiola, care to comment?
Yeah, actually, as we're having this conversation, all I was thinking about was a colleague of mine had a litigation matter come out of California, and it was kind of the similar situation. The owner was Hispanic, and had brought in some partners to help with funding. So they were in a very vulnerable position. They were like, okay, this is great. This is how much money I'm going to get infused. This is how much money it's going to be. Well, they have an offer to get bought out. All of a sudden, there is a contract somewhere that is not splitting the sale as it should be for them to have qualified for the social equity program. And so, this document, this random document that was floating around that the client had signed and, was legitimate, had our client walking away with, I think, 15% of the profits, when all the other paperwork showed him at like 75% ownership. So it was a very scary kind of situation, because when you're talking about financing, people forget how vulnerable you can be when you're not, you're trying to run this business, and it's because of your efforts that you're even in line to get this business license. You get it, and now, you have basically vultures coming out of the woodwork, and that's really when people get very ugly when it comes to financing. And so I think it's, what Jennifer said, it's so important to have a lawyer help you walk through the steps, help you understand and educate you on your rights and what you can and can't do. So, it's still in litigation, and it's gotten pretty nasty, but as we're having this conversation, that's all I kept thinking was about this client. I was like, this is exactly the scenario that California was wanting to prevent. And while we have the laws on our side, as we're reading it, it's like, this doesn't make sense. This isn't how it's going to work. It's still an expensive battle. We're doing this pro bono for this client, which is really great. But, when you're looking at those billables and keeping track and thinking about like, wow, this person is being put in a vulnerable position because of lack of financing. Now they're in a deeper hole for all the legal fees to try to get them out and rectify the situation. So yes, education is incredibly important, and having a lawyer that's wanting and willing to help you and really does want to do good by the community. Those people are out there, and definitely encourage you to reach out.
And I think that's one of the significant roles that the NHCC can do and will continue to do. From my perspective on more of the institutional corporate side, I have a hard time connecting the different facets of this industry, the minority would-be licensee and the institutional player that's doing an IPO for $100 million. And so how does this industry grow and take care of the smaller player with the significant consolidation and the huge money and dollars that are going into this industry? It's an open-ended question. One of the trends that we're seeing now are these massive REITs, real estate investment trusts. These are, funds with billions of dollars, literally, that are coming in, that are being very, very strategic and clever, and getting involved in the real estate aspects of this industry. Where does this, let's sort of segue into potential trends. Where do you see the regulatory scheme moving forward in 2022 and beyond from some of the lessons that we've seen in 21? Maybe with banking, access to capital markets, or continuing social equity programs?
I think we'll see. So there are a number of states coming online in 2022, New York and Connecticut. Connecticut also has a very intense social equity component. Jericho can speak better to what other states are in the pipeline and how fulsome of a social equity program they'll have. But I think that at least for this particularly large East Coast market, like that is a big part of it. And there are rules in place that they don't exactly prevent consolidation, but they do ensure that local residents remain part of the cap tables of these companies, and also that minorities remain on the cap tables of these companies. Like for a lot of new companies being licensed in New Jersey, and I know I keep referring to Jersey, but that's the only state that has regulations out. The new companies can't change they can't change majority ownership for their first 2 years of operation. Like they're really limited in what they can do. So there's that. I think so that's, we'll see how it plays out. Another area where we could see change for the better is what we've all talked about so much, which is the Safe Banking Act. There is an idea, I think, among some parts of the Democratic Party that safe banking is somehow protecting the big companies, and like that it's just to protect the MSOs. And in my experience, in like also talking to a lot of very smart people in this field, that's just simply not the case. It'll help small operators so much more than it could a very large company that has economies of scale and can have like multiple operations and have large enough revenue. Whereas the small operators, they're just getting hammered by their taxes because for those who don't know, the IRS doesn't permit cannabis companies to take normal business deductions. So while most companies that you could have, you can deduct your cost of payroll, your rent, any number of things. Cannabis, they can't do that. So that is just a huge problem, though. I'm actually getting confused here. But then also the fact that you can't get banking, you can't get loans, you can't get like access to credit, you can't go through like normal banks. There are just so many problems there that this could make an enormous difference for people.
Fabiola, how about you? Trends, what would you hope or expect to see in 2022 and beyond as we begin to wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've been seeing a lot of questions in regards to employment matters with clients, including consumption and, how do they treat workplace and drug testing. And so, I mean, that's going to be an interesting topic come the new year as this industry continues to mature. And, my clients are really trying to level up to the next stage in their business development. And so one thing, again, as I mentioned, is just understanding kind of workplace drug testing. How does that play into the fact that, marijuana remains illegal? For some of my clients, that are farmers, they have their own regs. They're out on the farm. They're like, as long as you're not doing whatever you're doing on the job and it's not impairing you to do your job, then we don't care. For some other of my clients are really trying to grapple with figuring out what their drug testing policies are going to be. And so that's going to be an interesting scenario that's going to be being built out. Washington State doesn't have particular laws that say this is how you need to run your drug testing program. So employers really do have a lot of leeway. I think in this new world of the great resignation that I'm hearing, really trying to listen and understand what your employees want and how you're going to make it so it's a much more comfortable workplace environment for folks to be in is going to be really interesting. So it's going to be, I'm very eager to see how these policies are going to develop within the next year or so. So that's what I'm seeing in my neck of the woods.
And Jericho, how about you? What do you think are some of the trends going on for next year?
I'm hoping we're going to see a lot more accessibility to expungement opportunities, which directly affects our community, easier access to expungement opportunities, more widespread and educational opportunities for expungement opportunities. I think that states are starting to realize that you can't just pass a law and expect people to come running through the door with 50 pages of forms to fill out at the courthouse and, rely on them to get it done. So I think that those expungement programs are developing and becoming more accessible and easier to execute. And I'm hoping we continue to see that in the coming years. And additionally, I'm hoping we're going to see, which may not necessarily be a regulatory trend, but a lot of the bigger MSOs are starting to implement, national corporate responsibility programs and incubator programs for social equity licensees. And I think that that's something that as we begin to hold them accountable as industry professionals and regulators, we'll see more of that coming online too and actually benefiting communities of color and women-owned businesses and other groups that were disproportionately impacted by the drug war. So I'm excited to see that too, and I hope that positive trend continues.
That's interesting. If you look at some of the institutional players, the capital markets right now are flush, and a large operator can probably access debt financing at 8%. I'd love to see that type of financing available for a new applicant. It's not there yet. But I think the challenge is for the mature players, the players that are flush with capital, to take this head on and understand that social equity programs are just one piece, but that there needs to be oxygen and capital invested to really grow this and hopefully become a business where underserved members of the community can participate. So this has been a really engaging conversation. I hope all of you have found it worthwhile. Would each of you care to have some parting thoughts, or should we open this up to see if there's any questions out there? I don't know if the moderator can confirm If there are any questions from those that are attending, let's give it a moment and see if any questions show up. Okay, so apparently we don't have questions from attendees at the moment. Fabiola, parting thoughts.
Just want to say that this is going to be a really amazing opportunity for the Latino community. I think we got to keep our eyes out. We have to stay alert. We have to stay vigilant. I know there's going to be a lot of roadblocks and a lot of different barriers coming up, but there are so many resources that are coming out for the Latino community. And so we have to do our best to be able to share that with everyone and be able to see how we can help each other out in this industry.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I just want to echo what my amazing colleagues have said, and there are just so many opportunities here at this time. It's a kind of unique time when a new industry like becomes legal and opens up. So I think just trying to find a place in it and being smart, you can really build a business for yourself.
Erico, you get the last word.
Yeah, you know, it's really exciting time. This particular organization, NHCC, is really the first of its kind for the Hispanic community in this industry. I'm really excited for the work we're going to get to do in the coming year. This is the first one of these discussions that we're having, and I'm hopeful that as you know, the organization matures, we'll get into some more specific details about these opportunities in our future conversations and really start to see actualized opportunities executed for the members of our group, as well as the larger Hispanic community. So I'm just really excited to be a part of that. I hope that everybody seizes the opportunity to get involved with us and to use us as a resource. So reach out if you have questions, and it's going to be a great year. Thanks.
Well, with that, thank you all, and happy holidays. Have a terrific new year, and we'll see you all real soon. Bye for now.
All righty. The stream has ended.